All right, good morning, everyone. My name's Glenn Hernandez. I know it's 8:15, and we're going to get started. Before we run with the panel here, I want to take an opportunity and introduce Harry Larson, who's the Regional Vice President of the Nordic region, and I wanted him to pass some information for folks, both on the panel and the audience. Harry.
Thanks, Glenn, for giving me this opportunity. So I'm from Sweden. I'm the RVP there, as Glenn said. A couple of years ago, I identified a problem that, society depends on critical infrastructure, and cybersecurity will be, labor in cybersecurity will be lacking in the future. So I took an initiative to start a hacking competition in order to attract people to this domain, and also to attract people to AFCEA, which I think is a great organization. So I gathered some funding and created the infrastructure and some challenges, and teamed up with the Royal Institute of Technology and the best Swedish hacking team. So and we did this as a proof of concept 3 years ago. It turned out well. We didn't have that many participants though, but the proof of concept worked. And we increased the competition. So last year we had like 450 teams from 63 different countries. And we do this in 2 steps. We do an online qualifier in April, and then an on-site final in Stockholm. So this year, on the online qualifier in April, we have 763 teams from 93 different countries. And the 7 best teams from the open class and the student class will be flown in to Stockholm to participate at the final on-site. My sponsors will cover all expenses. So there's no cost for the people. The online qualifier, no cost. They can tap in from everywhere. And for the people qualifying to the final, there's no cost at all. And I think the importance of this is actually that we need to attract people to this area, because this will be key in the future, I think, because we're lacking a lot of those labor. So next year, I'm aiming for more than 1,000 teams and from more than 100 countries. And the competition is called MidnightSunCTF.se. MidnightSunCTF.se. So CTF stands for Capture the Flag. So thanks for giving me the opportunity. I think this is an important topic.
So for those that are attending the session today, you'll be able to qualify for continuing education credits. In order to achieve that, if you're an AFCEA member, see Zach over there in the white shirt on your way out after the hour's up around 9:15, and you'll get, if you're an AFCEA member, you'll get an email saying that you've gotten the credit for this. And if you're not an AFCEA member, you can still qualify for the credit, but you'll have to do that on your own in order to provide the documentation and such. So I just wanted to thank you for coming to this morning's session. I know it's early start at 8:15. And hopefully you found a way to get into the hall without too much problem. But my name's Glenn Hernandez. I'm the National Director for the U.S. Cyber Challenge. And it's my honor to have the panel for you today. And I would like to introduce them. From my right here, we have Missy Anderson from DHS, Mr. Brian Greene from Coursera, Mr. Alan Poller from SANS Institute, Ms. Danielle Santos from NIST, and Mr. Sam Visner from MITRE. And so the format is we're going to give each of the panelists an opportunity to talk about what they're doing within the organization, talk about initiatives that are really making a difference in the country and how they know that. And then obviously I want input from the audience in terms of what you're seeing from your perspective to deal with this workforce area. If you haven't seen this month's issue of Signal Magazine, there was General Shea gave a commentary on this issue. He voiced it as more of a double jeopardy for the nation. It's an issue impacting both the economy and our military. And I imagine in your workplace, workforce issues is not a topic that is foreign to many folks. We experience it in our everyday lives, and we realize, at least from our perspectives, that the country in general has an opportunity to really get around this issue like we've had in the past, but it's going to take a national effort. And so hopefully with the contributions of the panelists and yourselves here in the audience, I'd like to carry on that conversation that we started over at least the last couple years with AFCEA in our forum called Cyber Education Research and Training Symposium. It's called AFCEA CERTS. We've had it for the past couple Januaries in Augusta, Georgia. And that forum has been able to have national strategic conversations about the workforce issues. This year we had Rob Joyce from NSA and General Kroll really talk seriously about the call to action and what the nation needs to do in regards to this area. So I'll start with Missy Anderson from DHS.
Good morning. Thank you, Glenn, for allowing me to participate on this panel. I'm actually representing the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA. We were formerly a part of the Department of Homeland Security, but now we are our own agency, and we handle cybersecurity infrastructure and security nationwide. I'm also representing the Cybersecurity Education Awareness Branch, CENA, and I'm the Federal Virtual Training Environment Program Lead. I provide free cybersecurity training to over 270,000 folks. That includes U.S. military veterans, federal government employees and contractors, and state, local, tribal, and territorial government employees. We lead the national cybersecurity public awareness, education, training, and workforce development efforts to support the protection against and respond to cyber threats and hazards to the homeland's economic and national security. My branch, Cybersecurity Education Awareness Branch, we manage a few programs, cybersecurity awareness programs, formal cybersecurity education, that includes the K-12 arena and collegiate programs, training and education programs, that's our NICS portal and FedVTE, and cybersecurity workforce development programs. We have over 15 tools that I'll highlight some of our latest tools that we've launched. And we also handle state, local, tribal, and territorial cybersecurity engagement. And strategically, we're looking to develop the national cybersecurity workforce pipeline through our education and training programs, starting from the K-12, all the way to looking at retraining, providing academic and education within cybersecurity courses and certifications on FedVTE. Our NICS portal is pretty much our one-stop shop. That's for the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Careers and Studies, NICS, NICCS. And we have over 30,000 visitors per month, where folks can look at our latest tools on workforce development. Our latest tools are a mapping tool, which pretty much takes the guesswork out of the NICE framework, and we're able to help folks map cybersecurity positions to the NICE framework. So this tool, you can put in a few of your KSA's knowledge, skills, and abilities, skills, and then it will jut out a work role map to the NICE framework. We also have our K-12 programs, along with NICERC, where we provide free curriculum to state and national programs, teachers, so that we can enhance cybersecurity education in the classroom, and then also develop that awareness of cybersecurity careers early on. We also have our federal virtual training environment tool, also on the NICS side, where folks can go to FedVT, create an account, and they can have access to over 65 cybersecurity courses. We do have some of the latest cybersecurity courses for CISSP, Certified Ethical Hacker, Security Plus, and I'm constantly updating and creating new lines of training for the hottest cyber security certifications. I also do have courses related to federal agencies' skills and abilities. So we do have partnerships with DISA and other agencies where we are developing curricula internal to those organizations. We're also providing state, local, tribal, and territorial education, and that's just in general cybersecurity awareness and training, and then also mapping IT skills to folks such as election officials. Right now, I think we have a great panel, and I'm always looking to collaborate and learn more about how we can be more strategic in terms of workforce training and education, not just talking about it standalone, but using the tools to enhance the knowledge and to really create progress and goals in our cybersecurity workforce nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Brian Greene.
Good morning. Thank you, Glenn, for having us. So Glenn and I have attended a couple of the CERTS conferences. For those of you who have not attended CERTS and are deeply involved in cyber education readiness within your own organizations, it takes place at a great location down in Augusta, Georgia, in partnership with the Georgia Cyber Center, a brand new facility down there that the state of Georgia invested about $100 million to provide cyber education, cyber investments for the community, as well as Fort Gordon. And so a terrific community that we're proud to be a part of. So as introduction, my name is Brian Greene. I'm with Coursera. We are a MountainView.com organization, about 7 years strong, if you will. Largest ed tech platform globally. Got about 40 million users on our platform today. We are partnered with about 160 academic universities, and so we're getting rich details from those academic communities, and we're also partnered with about 30 or 40 private sector organizations as well. And then on the business front, we're partnered with about 1,900 organizations, and our philosophy is really looking at the academics, knowledge, education, training, learners, learner needs, learner development, talent development, as well as business needs. And so our mission is really to connect those three together. What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that businesses are looking for within the talent? Once talent develops those knowledge, skills, and abilities, pairing them with businesses so that those two can have a nice symbiotic relationship going forward, addressing some of these broader needs that we have domestically and globally. So we're going to have a nice discussion, I think, today relative to data as well as programs. And our position really is identifying learners who want to learn, providing them access to those programs that are unique, inherently imperative to their role and responsibility. We don't look at the cyber challenge purely from a technical standpoint. As most leaders in this community will suggest, much what the cyber workforce needs is the mindset, if you will, developing those unique emotional intelligence skills, business skills, strategic thinking, creative thinking. And so our philosophy as others in our community is to encourage our consumers, businesses, and governments not to purely look at the cyber challenge from a technical lens, but as we're looking at best practices within this community, to really evaluate the opportunities beyond just the technical capabilities and really the strategic thinking, and looking at designers and other areas where the cyber workforce is required, needed element or component within the community that they work in. And so we're doing a lot around the development, both domestically and globally, in developing that inherent knowledge that is beyond just technical. We're also paying very, very close attention to skill sets within communities that are developing. And so we've got a brand new GSI report, Global Skills Index, based upon the 40 million users on our platform. That is pretty impressive. And so in working with communities like Egypt and the 1 Million Arab Coders Initiative over in UAE, communities like Colombia and Brazil that are trying to attract industry to come to their communities to begin to diversify their marketplace, we're identifying and can provide unique data sets that say where the cyber skills are today, or where the unique skills that are relevant to cyber professionals, where they're at today and where they can invest. And so we've got some great data that we can share throughout this discussion this morning as well as beyond in helping identify what are the real unique challenges relative to skill sets. And then the third element that I'd like to talk about this morning is really the environment. And so for those of us that have been in this community for 10, 15, 20 plus years, most all of us recognize that training and development is not a unique opportunity in a vacuum. It really is the change management of all change management within any organization. And so if we send users into a classroom and they come back into what remains as a stagnant environment, that knowledge is going to have a shelf life. And so we highly recommend any major training initiative, any major employee development opportunity, to really look at the broader change management, looking at leadership, looking at peers, looking at subordinates, looking at setting up communities of interest to continue that knowledge as we look at the 70-20-10 model, which would indicate that most of the learning occurs on the job. So how are we enabling that learning on the job to occur within these newer communities that we continue to resonate this idea of the imperative of cybersecurity? So with that, I'll pause and transfer my colleague.
No, thank you, Brian. I just want to take a pause for a quick sound check. Can folks hear us from the panel okay? Yes? All right. All right. Next up is Mr. Alan Pollard from SANS Institute.
Good morning. Zia did a nice job on how the federal government is helping employees and military upgrade skills, and she's done an incredible job in upgrading VTE. It needed it, but it's got it. So it's really an elegant job. And Coursera is this massive, elegant delivery system for knowledge all over the world, and it really brings out people in countries that have no access. I'm going to go a completely different direction, mainly because everything just happened in the last 4 or 5 days. I'll take you back 2 years. The United Kingdom recognized that although there's a need for many different skills in cybersecurity, the great shortage is in people who can find the persistent presence, for people who can find the infection and get it out before damage is done. That wasn't a requirement 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were building perimeters around systems. Now we know perimeters are broken. So the talent is the talent that can find the bad guy after he's gotten in and before he does a lot of damage to us. Turns out it's about 18 times or 20 times harder than building a good perimeter. You have to have all sorts of knowledge that you don't have if you're a perimeter defender. So they decided that it was an existential issue for the United Kingdom to find those people, and they invested $25 million to find 600 of them. I'm going to give you a sense of value. So they put $25 million into a program over 4 years to find 600 of them. They finished the first year in November, I think, and they're in the second year now. They were completely blown away by the numbers. In the first year, they found 750 people who they were sure were high-end talent. No, 700. And they found 250 who were higher than that. So that they created an environment in which that talent could identify itself. They were getting none of it out of the existing system. So they wouldn't spend $25 million if they were getting it, right? And they got more than they were hoping in 4 years in the first year. And now they're talking about close to 10,000 elite talent over the 4 years. And just to put that in perspective, the UK has about, England, this was just England, it wasn't Wales and Scotland, they have about 55 million people. We have about 6 times that number. So if the United States had similar numbers, we would be in the 60,000 range. And that's the number that almost everyone who studied this agrees is what's missing at the top end. There are lots of estimates about how many security people, but for that very high-end talent, the people who can stand the walls when under attack and innovate under attack, 60,000 would do it. So we now have this concept from the UK that there's a possibility that you could do it. And what was fascinating was they were completely non-intuitive, meaning the things they did were completely the opposite of what we were doing in the United States. And the U.S. has now tried this. The White House is doing something with it right now, but the governors took it on in the United States, and that's why I was saying it just happened. I just got a letter last night, and I printed it for you because it's wonderful, from the governors, from one of the governors, to the presidents of the colleges in his state about what the results were of the U.S. test of this. Glenn, can you give those out? Actually, give one of each of these to everybody. Glenn, give them one of those too. If you guys want one too, I'm happy to share. You're welcome. So, read the letter first. So, we have this possibility with the leadership of the states. So the key is the states have the problem in spades because they have the manpower responsibility. If you think about what a governor has to do, needs to build jobs for people. So if he has a program that does training but doesn't do jobs, doesn't solve the problem at all. So the governors, I guess I should give you a second to read it, since nobody is doing anything but reading it. So, all right. Take a second and read the letter. It's actually a cool letter. Did I not give you enough, Glenn? Here. A letter? Here's a letter. All right. Did you read it? More or less. So it actually didn't come from the governor. It either came from the CISO of the state or the head of technology or the head of emergency management or somebody on the governor's cabinet who sent this letter to the presidents of their colleges. And it was 27 states. Those are all the governors that had gotten into this pilot. The National Governors Association announced it. The states that wanted to signed up. Those 27 states were in, and that's what happened. What they did, though, look at those numbers matter. The 13,000 in 3 weeks matters. And what matters more is 2,400 of them that have this elite talent. That's just 13,000, and it's a tiny fraction of the college students. And once the presidents, what was cool was when a president of a college sent the invitation out, the highest number we got was 2%, but several of them got 1.6% of all the students saying, hey, I might be good at this. And they weren't the computer students. They were the French students and the music students, and they were the people who can solve these really hard cybersecurity problems who weren't necessarily identified early in their academics that they should go into computer science. So what's cool about this is it goes way beyond what we thought of as where we're going to get our cybersecurity talent. We sort of thought we'll get the STEM students to computer science, to computer security, and that'll do it. And you can see how well that's worked for us. So what's cool about this is it has the possibility to expand to close to 2 million kids over the next 5 years. Not in cybersecurity, but who can try it to see if they have the talent. And that's the other half of the story. That's the story that the UK showed. They have a game. The game's called CyberStart. And CyberStart is not a teaching tool. My favorite story about CyberStart is they were using it in the UAE to find kids who were talented, and they had 4,500 young people try it. 450 did well enough to come to camps. There were 2 camps for women and 9 camps for men. And one of the women's camps, one of the 17-year-olds brought her 9-year-old sister because her mom had something to do that week. And you're going to camp, take your sister. And the 9-year-old had nothing to do the first day. The second day, they gave her a computer. And the third day, she was showing her sister and her sister's friends how to debug Python code. And she thought Python was a snake 4 days earlier. So, and she didn't learn it. She didn't know Python. The game teaches you. So it's a game of challenges, and to solve the challenges. It turns out, this is a key, 2 or 3% of Americans and Brits and everybody else are good at that. And 90-some%, me included, are crappy at that. It's the 2% that we got to find. If we keep trying to teach everybody cybersecurity, we're going to get what one woman wrote yesterday. We just sort of describe the problem. We can't solve it. And we've got to find this 2 or 3%. What's fun is this program will expand to all states next year. I wanted to share the other picture with you and then quit. That the Brits also figured out how to test adults to see if you are one of those people. What the adult test doesn't do is get the tenacity and the curiosity that the game does, but it finds out if you got the brain wiring to be one of those people. And the chart at the chart at the top of this is actually U.S. government programs that are using this talent identification program. And if you're a teacher in this field, you know the difference when you're trying to teach people who are just looking at you dully and the people who are really excited about what you're trying to teach them. It's just exciting. So this test tells you who you shouldn't let into cybersecurity, although it's very hard to tell them that. But that's its great strength. You can say, Alan, don't do it. But it differentiates between people who are going to be certainly great and people who can be great if they get a bridge course. And the U.S. Air Force was the ones who first discovered that you should never teach cybersecurity to somebody until they've mastered anatomy. Think of a surgeon who you could teach a surgeon to cut, but if they don't know anatomy, you really don't want them cutting you. And what we've done in cybersecurity is we've taught thousands and thousands of people how to do cybersecurity before they've mastered operating systems, before they've mastered the stack, before they've mastered programming, before they've mastered networking, before they've mastered anatomy. So you're teaching them cybersecurity, and they have no clue what they're doing because they don't even speak the language of the systems they're protecting. So what the Brits did is they automated this course, built a national exam. So they used the game to find the talent, they used the course to build the bridge, and then the course is described on the other side, and then they do an in-depth immersion academy. And the U.S. now has, I think, something like 400 or 500 people going through these immersion academies. My guess is it'll be about 3,000 over the next 2 years. These are people who get jobs at the 91% rate within 6 months in cybersecurity. So this isn't a training program where you hope to get a job. This is a training program where the companies are fighting for the graduates. Veterans, women, the government guys already, the Maryland people, all of those people are getting jobs. So this field is not quite as hard to fathom, but we had to learn a little bit from the Brits. And that's okay because we started with Brits. All right? Back to you.
Thank you, Alan. So, as you can tell, Alan's very passionate and very knowledgeable and has been speaking on this for many, many years. And it's great to see CyberStart really take off around the world, Alan. And I've had my kids do CyberStart as well. And in a way, it's sort of some of the apps that we see on our mobile devices, how once you start, you're sort of curious. You say, well, how do I get to the next level? And through that process of, puzzle solving and creativity that brought out through the game, Alan, it's amazing what you can do with it. And please follow up with us over time and see what we're able to do in the United States with this. But thank you very much for the commentary, and look forward to comments from the audience here soon. Next up is Ms. Danielle Santos from NIST.
Morning. Danielle Santos here. I'm from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, representing the program office for the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. NICE, what we see ourselves as, is really a convening organization, a convening body to bring together all of the people who are doing work in cybersecurity education, training, and workforce development to feed that pipeline of cyber talent, build that pipeline, and fill all of the unfilled cybersecurity jobs that are out there around the nation. So again, although we're led by NIST, we see ourselves as a convening body made up of partners with academia, industry, other government organizations, and we kind of manage that through a couple different ways. First, with the federal government side, we convene an interagency coordinating council of others like AFCEA from DHS and other federal partners from the NSA, the NSF as a funding organization or another research organization like NIST, DHS, again, who has a big cybersecurity workforce that they're filling, OPM, who is doing human resources for the government, as well as the DoD, who many of you are probably familiar with, who are also building a very large cybersecurity workforce. So we meet with them regularly, and then on the public sector side, we also have a nice working group which is open to anyone who would like to join. It's heavily academic attendance, but also industry attendance, training and certification providers, representatives from people like SANS and Coursera and MITRE, and again, the academic side as well. And we bring in leaders from the public sector, the private sector, to lead these groups in areas of K-12 education, collegiate education, competitions, looking at the gaming side of how we can train and educate for cybersecurity, as well as workforce management. So how do we hire, recruit, retain cybersecurity talent? Other two main ways that I want to briefly talk about of how we play this convening role in what we call the NICE community is by coordinating and organizing 2 annual conferences. One is for overall broad cybersecurity education, training, and workforce development, and that's our annual NICE conference. It'll be in November of this year. If you're interested in speaking, sharing your story, or learning about other efforts like some of the ones you've heard today, I welcome you to check that out. It'll be in Phoenix, Arizona. And then one that's K-12 focused. So that's really looking at educators and administrators in the K-12, bleeding over a little into the collegiate area as we talk about those career technical education programs, but really looking at curriculum and ways to train at a younger level. And that'll happen in December in California. So I could go on and on about that, but I know our focus for the topics today was supposed to be about some of the data around the projects that we're working on. And coming from NIST, a standards organization, one of the main efforts that we have in the NICE office is for the NICE framework. And Zia mentioned that a little bit, but I'll give a kind of overview of what that is. And it's our way of trying to standardize what cybersecurity work is to better describe it, so that when employers are looking to fill positions of need in their organizations and job seekers are looking for those jobs, they can talk on the same wavelength. And if one is looking for a specific skill set, we can look for those skill sets and describe those skill sets in the same way. So it breaks down cybersecurity work into 7 different categories, which breaks further down until you get to specific knowledge, skills, and abilities for a specific work role. One of the areas that we've kind of taken that framework into looking at the data side is by looking at the supply and demand of cybersecurity work. So a few years ago, we partnered with CompTIA and Burning Glass to look at data out there on cybersecurity jobs. And what they did was look at job postings across the U.S. and match them up to the NICE framework, and they were able to pull and provide a heat map of jobs across the U.S. and show which ones, either by state or metropolitan area, are in areas of operate and maintain, oversee and govern, investigate, analyze, so that people can get an idea of where are areas of need in certain categories of cybersecurity work. So maybe they're interested in investigative cybersecurity work. They're interested in digital forensics types work. And so where can they look for those kinds of positions? The CyberSeek tool also takes that job data and mapped out pathways for cybersecurity work. So it looks at feeder roles, so what we traditionally think of as IT work roles, and looks at the skills that those kinds of roles might be doing, and then brings them into different levels of cybersecurity specific work at the beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. And it tells you, it breaks down some example work roles there. It talks about the different certifications you might need, commonly requested certifications or degree levels. It also talks about average salary, things like that, some data points that people might want to know as they're seeking cybersecurity work. One of the other programs that I also wanted to talk about data-wise was a program called the Regional Alliances and Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships. We'll call that RAMPS, just so we don't have to say that long title. So RAMPS was a program that we did to make sure that organizations regionally are working together to fill their local pipelines, noting that different areas of the country are going to be focused on different types of cybersecurity work. In New York, it might be financial cybersecurity focuses. In other areas of the country, it might be automotive or manufacturing or agriculture. So different tools that are going to be used in those settings will need different skill sets. So to start thinking about the certain skills that will need to be taught in formal education or training programs to meet employer needs for that area, we partnered with 5 different regional areas of the country to designate a lead for this regional partnership, and they were required to start working with K-12 organizations, regional coalitions or consortiums that are in the area, as well as regional industry employers. And the idea there was to get them to start talking about the specific skills they need. One example is community colleges and universities starting to talk together to think about how they could shorten cybersecurity programs so that students are spending less on tuition, spending less time in the classroom so that they can get the skills they need and then go right into the workplace. We saw a lot of benefits there, including the time savings, the cost savings, as well as just building up internships in the local area. So if we can start getting kids in the local area thinking and knowing that jobs exist in their area, they don't have to necessarily move to the Silicon Valley or out here to the DC area, that they might be interested in long-term working and staying in their area. So I'll stop there. I could go on forever about some of these programs, but I'll hand it out to the next speaker.
No, thank you, Danielle. So I just have a question. You talked about the data and the heat map. Is that the cyberseek.org? Is that where you can find that information? So cyberseek.org, if you've ever seen it, it's pretty interesting how they were able to segment the data and provide it in different ways that you want to look at it across the country and find out what parts of the country are really saturated and what other areas are really challenged in this area in terms of workforce. So one thing I'd like to also advertise, this session doesn't end after 9:15, right? So the folks out here in the panel, they've taken their time to come out from where they're at. I want you to make sure you have access to them as well. So if we're unable to get your question in within the hour, please engage with one of the participants here on the panel, and hopefully you'll be happy to answer their questions and follow up with them. But we'd love to continue the conversation with you after this, because from AFCEA perspective, we have the Cyber Workforce Committee, and we're not stopping. I mean, we've been active for over a year now, and we really want to engage the AFCEA membership on how we can carry on this conversation across the country and really try to make some breakthroughs within the government, with industry, and academia on really taking on some of the challenges like the panelists are bringing up. So last up, we have Mr. Sam Visner from MITRE.
Thanks, Glenn. Is this working? Okay, great. Thanks for asking me to participate. I'm here actually in 2 capacities because I am the director of the National Cybersecurity Federally Funded Research and Development Center at MITRE. So I am a consumer of cybersecurity talent, and I'm also an adjunct professor of cybersecurity policy, operations, and technology at Georgetown University. So in principle, I'm on the producer side of cybersecurity talent. We call this a closed system. So hopefully I can make some kind of a contribution. Before I do anything else, I do want to put in a plug. If you've not picked it up, do get the current version, the current edition of Signal, Building the Cyber Workforce. Some very useful and very insightful articles and observations here and recommendations. Very much worth reading. If you can, I get it. AFCEA can get it to you. I'm sure Glenn
it's
can
upstairs.
Get you copies.
I see plenty of copies up there.
Yeah, it's certainly worth reading. So, in my role at MITRE, as director of a federally funded research and development center, let me tell you who we are and what we do and what kind of skills we need. We are sponsored by NIST, National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. We develop architectures comprised principally of commercial cybersecurity products, things that are available, that can be put together into architectures that can be used essentially by any industry in the United States, the banking industry, the healthcare industry, the transportation industry, the energy industry, fill in the blank. The idea being that these industries do not have access to some super secret billion-dollar, highly classified, impossibly difficult to use technology in the middle of their architecture, that businesses and enterprises throughout the United States need cybersecurity solutions that are practical, and working with NIST using the traditional NIST model of building architectures, reference architectures. This is what right looks like. You can adapt from this model. That's what we do. And that is giving rise to the need for some very highly sophisticated cybersecurity talent. But before I talk about that, let me tell you what we're doing in terms of our own activities. We've built a program called the Academic Affiliates Council, in which we're pipelining interns into our Research and Development Center in support of NIST. That's going very well. We've got about a dozen academic institutions. It's coordinated for us by the University System of Maryland, because we're located up in Rockville, and they're an original plank holder in what we do. We have a program at MITRE called the MITRE Initiatives Program, which essentially is an internal research and development program. We bring academic institutions, grad students, and others in to do some very high-end cybersecurity research, and that also, I think, is proved to be one of the most powerful tools for getting good ideas and stimulating people to think about what comes next. You know, what are we going to do about post-quantum encryption? And who's going to worry about that? So some of the money that we're spending is going to those sorts of things. But having said all of that, I worry a great deal that our definition of cybersecurity skills has become far too narrow. And that's because that when I'm not director of the center, I have to think essentially like a political scientist or an international relations guy. And if I take a look at cyberspace, we've moved from an environment that was essentially moving around electromagnetic energy to a contested environment of geopolitical competition. And therefore, we're not operating in an environment in which it's simply good enough to know the technology. We have to know a lot about adversaries and allies and partners and competitors and enemies, and not just what they're doing, but how they're doing it and why they're doing it. And this has led to a new kind of challenge. The cybersecurity professionals of the future are going to be operating in a world that's going to have at least four, and you can build out from that, but let's say at the highest level, time permitting, four challenges. First, cybersecurity technology is changing. There are new products coming on the market all the time. We're looking at heuristics and artificial intelligence to be able to find things. We can't, as Alan pointed out, simply operate at the perimeter and hope that that's going to be good enough. Clearly, it isn't good enough. Secondly, the information technology infrastructures that we're going to have to safeguard are changing. We're moving to 5G. We're going to have tens of thousands of LEOSAT satellites providing ubiquitous global 5G coverage. We're moving to IP version 6 so that anything that we want to connect will be connected and connectable. We'll be using AI to mediate complex infrastructures, and these infrastructures will be used cloud-based AI analytics. So that's a second strain. The third strain is that we're going to have to worry about adversaries that have both increasingly sophisticated technology as well as far better tradecraft that's going to be arranged against us. And lastly, the requirements of our requirements. The standards are going to continue to get higher. There'll be new requirements in different industries. As industries become more sensitive to cybersecurity and privacy issues, for example, in Europe with GDPR, we're going to have to meet those requirements. So cyber tech is changing, the threat is changing, the IT environment is changing, and the requirements and regulatory environment are changing. And what this tells me is that in future, and sometimes I call this sort of the end of cybersecurity, we're going to have to do a better job of, as was pointed out earlier, of training people not just in cybersecurity, but overall in information technology. How can you be a good cybersecurity expert if you don't know much about the information technology infrastructure that you have to safeguard? And this means that we're going to have to do a better job of aligning education on information technology and engineering with cybersecurity education, as opposed to thinking of it purely as a specialty. And that leads me to my last point, and that is, as the nation begins to think about its cybersecurity research and development agenda, that agenda and that strategy needs to be coupled to an agenda to advance cybersecurity education, particularly in the scientific and technology realms. So let me stop at that point. That gives you sort of my view at 75,000 feet of the problem, as well as what my own organization is doing about it. Glenn, let me turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Sam. So this is an opportunity for the audience to participate. So there is a microphone here in the middle of the aisle. Please state your name and the organization and the question. Thank you.
But we turned it off, so you
Good.
is there a button?
Go ahead. It's on.
It's on now.
Oh, is it on? Okay. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. It's a really interesting panel. I work for the Secretary of the Air Force, Public Affairs, Public Relations. I do websites for a living. But years ago, maybe a decade or two, I issued visas in South Korea. I see the American education system as a kind of gambling program. We throw up extraordinary amounts of money, and then we pray that there's a payoff. But in South Korea, I was shocked that corporations are spending as much as $500,000 for employees who have been with the company for a decade. They send a family of 4 to the United States for a fully paid master's degree. 3 to 5 years. It's books, tuition, fees, and living expenses. And I'm wondering if you see a future where U.S. corporations might do something similar in our investment in our employees.
Thanks. I think that's a great question, and I don't know what we will do, but I will tell you that if you go back to the Second World War and you go back to a national strategic decision that the United States would be dominant in nuclear energy, and national strategic decisions that we would be dominant in space exploration and in aerospace science and technology, this was an environment in which government and academia and industry worked together to identify key problems, build a community, identify the members of that community, and assign problems and resources to members of that community that included key corporations and included key academic institutions, which would focus on highly promising, gifted people who had the skills necessary to make that happen. And that was a decision in which we coupled the nation's research and development strategy for those challenges with a national strategy for education to support that research and development. I think that's really what we need, and that's something I think for which we should advocate as strongly as possible. I don't know that we will do it, but I think we should.
You said something really important about a gambling system. There's a woman named Gina Raimondo who is the governor of Rhode Island, and you brought her up. She said, no more train and pray programs. We've got to stop paying for education without knowing those people are going to have jobs. And I think the governors are going to lead that in the United States. I know the corporations are. There's already a bit of a competition among the federal contractors on who has the top talent. There always has been under the covers. But now it's becoming public that a lot of the smaller contractors don't train their people, and they're putting others in. So the point is, no more train and pray, but there's a huge economic industry for training and praying. It's massive in the United States. So everybody hears no more train and pray, and then they go right back and spend the money on the lottery system.
I'll just add one fine point, both to support, but yet provide a spotlight in recognizing the problem. So Forbes had a report recently that highlighted the number one investment from Chinese investors in the United States is real estate. And the reason for that is the influx of Chinese residents that are moving here for our education system. So we still have the number one education system in the world, right? It is still the beacon, if you will, of hope. But because we have partnerships with about 160 universities worldwide, those universities also are recognizing the changes going on within the higher education systems and recognizing that it needs to dramatically get modified, because they recognize that the way that learners learn today is much differently than what we did 30, 45, 50 years ago. And so they're beginning to make those modifications. Coursera is a great example of this in recognizing that having access to higher education programs at the moment of need, right, that everyone talks about frequently in our industry, is that as I'm learning new and more, and I need to apply these elements and conditions, and I need to start changing things and solving things, I need to learn right now. I don't have an opportunity to go off for 6 months or 2 years. I need to learn it now. And so they're recognizing that need to change both their content as well as the delivery system. So I think that is underway.
Hi, I'm Al Lerberg. I'm the president of Cybersecurity Recruiters, and I'm wondering what we can do to better support organizations like yours in the future.
Alan's got a good point up here. So from the NICE perspective, from our perspective, your participation and your feedback on what kinds of skills you need, what are the things you're looking for when you're hiring people, how are you currently partnering with others to feed your pipeline from the industry and employer standpoint, what are those best practices, the roles that you need, what do those look like? As I mentioned earlier, we have built a framework to try to describe cybersecurity work. In building that, we did start with feedback from the community on telling us what they are seeing, what they're using, and we can only keep improving that by getting more feedback from the public. So as we go through new iterations, we envision that document to be a living document. As Sam pointed out, things are going to be changing constantly. So in order to try to keep up with that, we need to try at least to move at the same pace. I don't know if we'll be able to achieve that, but at least try. And that consistent feedback from what industry is seeing, that's what's going to be key for us.
Any other panelists want to comment on the provider? Yeah.
Sure. Two things I would mention. Looking at small, medium businesses, obviously there's a growing trend of outsourcing work and tasks. So that's something I've worked with the state of California on, and actually outlining that there are over 30,000 cybersecurity jobs that need to be filled statewide there. So we looked at cybersecurity not being not only an IT problem, so that also could be something we focus in what we understand our cybersecurity problem actually is. And secondly, I recommend, pulling from your own resources within your locale, your state, your region. You have universities that are in partnership with us, our Centers for Academic Excellence. We have 272 universities across the nation, including the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, that are in cyber degree-related programs designated by the National Security Agency and Department of Homeland Security. And then we also have our Scholarships for Service program. We've had over 3,500 graduates since 2011, representing over 70 schools across the country. And these are students in cyber programs, designated, awarded. They are getting top-notch cyber education, and also they're understanding the NICE framework, and they will understand that common lexicon of cybersecurity work that will be very transferable to your organization.
I'm going to try and tie the two questions that just came up together in a question to the panel. What role do non-4-year programs have in terms of trying to overcome the challenge that we have in the country, like the trade schools and some of the providers that was just mentioned? What role do they play in trying to solve the challenge for the country?
The Maryland Higher Education Commission described that problem. The community colleges don't measure themselves on putting people to work. They measure themselves on getting them into 4-year colleges. The 4-year colleges don't measure themselves on getting people to work. So if your concern is how do we optimize an education system that gets these talented people to go to work as soon as they can and continue their education, not stop, but get them into the workforce without spending a fortune, none of the incentives are aligned for that. And they're initiating a new program in which the community colleges will identify talent. So it won't be everybody wants to try, but only the ones who do really well on these talent. They have something in healthcare too that's like this, but where only the kids who really have the talent will get into it. But if they get into it, they will actually go through the general ed in community education, so they learn to talk and walk, and then they will have a very intensive immersion training in cybersecurity to complete their degree, so that there will be a degree completion program which puts people to work. And it's modeled, the reason I know about it is it's modeled after these these immersion academies that I gave you on the handout. So we know it actually gets people the skills that they need to get into jobs. So it'll be a parallel path. The economics are nice because they'll have to pay for it, but it'll be guaranteed. If they don't get a job within a certain amount of time, the loans are paid off. So there's a guarantee, which is why they have to set it up for only people who can qualify for it. But I think that's going to be a new pathway that isn't in lieu of getting a 4-year degree. You still want to get a 4-year degree, but you want to get these super talented kids into the workforce quickly enough to protect the nation.
Anyone else want to answer?
Yeah. Going back to the data piece, Cybersecurity. So they've pulled the different jobs from job boards across the nation, and one of the things they looked at is degree levels. So commonly requested degree levels for a particular job. A lot of them do reference needing to have a 4-year bachelor's degree. Some of them masters. But also some of them just need a certificate, or maybe they need a specific certification. And I think as employers are getting more comfortable writing and updating, editing the job positions they have, instead of doing a copy and paste method and saying, hey, this job requires a 4-year degree, so mine does too. As they get more comfortable in knowing the specific jobs and skills that they need, and that maybe that talent doesn't require a 4-year degree behind it, maybe I can get the skills I need by recruiting from a CTF was mentioned earlier. Maybe I can go to one of those and see someone use their skills, and I can see them put it to the test, so to say. Maybe they don't need that 4 degree. Maybe I can just pull them out of wherever they're at, community college, high school, if it's a very low entry level position. So I think as that kind of evolves, we'll be able to better not measure, but utilize all of the different education mechanisms we have, instead of just pulling from 4-year, 6-year, and beyond degrees.
And I'll just add one closing comment. That Coursera for Campus is a program that Coursera has launched in creating partnerships between national community colleges throughout our country. Because if you look at the footprint that our nation's community colleges have, it's much wider and much more diverse in communities where we should be drawing in creating new cyber talent, not just in the major metropolitan or higher ed communities. So Coursera for Campus is beginning to create partnerships between state community college programs as well as higher ed programs, as we see that both as a pipeline, but also to diversify our cyber community more broadly.
No, it's great. Well, yes, sir.
Yes, how you doing? My name is Clarence Williams. I'm the Senior Advisor, Department of Veteran Affairs with the Cybersecurity and Workforce Management team. And it's really just 2 questions, but hopefully, I'll get this out really quickly. So my first question is, and this kind of goes to your point, Brian, just a little bit, is that how do we really begin to find that new talent, and especially in those areas that may be rural, that's not close to a metropolitan area? Because there's a little boy in the basement that may be in a country house somewhere that really has the capacity and the talent and aptitude to do this, but of course may not have the funding to go to a community college, may not have the funding to go to a summer camp for us to identify them. So how do we really begin to attract that talent, identify that talent?